I'm GJ with xpfe.fun, and I have taken apart a troubled Brother brand knitting machine, and I'm going to show you how I fixed a stuck carriage. Production was halted in the 1990s, and the KH881 is a 4.5mm 200 needle machine with a metal bed. The tips revealed today are going to apply to various needle machines, so let's go ahead and see what's going to be covered. The carriage, the sponge bar, the gear and the belt, lining it up, punch cards, cleaning it, bed assembly, inserting needles, inserting the sponge bar, and troubleshooting tips and what fits. So let's get started with the carriage. So my carriage stuck. It wouldn't change to any position. The knob would not turn. So the first thing I did was I had to degrease it, and after I let it sit in some Goo-Gone or some mechanical degreaser, I added boiling water straight from the kettle, and then I whopped it down with alcohol and let it dry. Next, I got some JIS screwdrivers. So these are Japanese screwdrivers, and they're different from Phillips heads. If you put a Phillips screwdriver into a JIS screw, it will strip the head and make you very sad. So use size 1 and 2 and a flat head and maybe some needle pliers. Knit It Now has a great diagram of the carriage. This is what a K carriage looks like, with the change knob, the weaving brush, and the presser plate or the sinker plate, along with all the weaving brushes down below. These are diagrams I got from an older manual, and this shows you the different parts of the handle, the stitch dial, and all of that. Mine came in Japanese, so I translated mine into English and lined it up onto the track. So this is the part that needs to line up onto the track, and you need to put it into CR to get it on, and then you can use the other knitting settings. And here you can see the front part of it without a sinker plate. It was still sticking even though there are no needles in the bed, and the carriage was completely clean, so I knew something else had to happen. I'm going to show you what I did. So first I took out the sponge bar, I stripped it down, I replaced it. I also replaced the sponge underneath the needle bed, and I used rubber window seal. This is the dimensions that I used. So next what I did is, after I put those two sponge elements in, I tackled the gear and the belt. So there's two gear wheels, one on each side, and it's connected by a metal belt. The metal belt and the gear wheel is here. It's sometimes called the clutch wheel. So this is the underside of the gear clutch, and as you can see, this is an example diagram from a KH880 machine, but it has spikes and valleys, and one of the things are not just that you have to sandwich this thing into the center between the two metal bars, but what you need to do is also make sure that the belt is completely lined up. There's going to be 8 holes and 1 valley, and you want to line up the 8 holes with the spikes on both ends. If you don't do that, your gear will stick, and that means when you slide it either left or right, you're going to notice that it's going to stick in one side. So when you reline up the belt, you'll notice that it'll be much smoother. So again, let's take a quick look at that belt. You'll see that there's 8 holes in between, and then there's a oval hole. That oval hole needs to line up with the valley of the gear in between the set of 8 spikes. Once you go ahead and do that, I think you'll notice a big difference. Here's the part list for that diagram we just saw, in case you want to look at any of those parts. So now this is flipped upside down, and I started putting back all of the screws. The screws that came with it need to be steel so that they'll magnetize to the end of your magnetic screwdriver. And now flipping it backside over, I went ahead and I had to adjust the belt to loosen it by the 2 screws underneath the gear so that the belt would line up. You can see here that after I did that, I tightened it all up and retightened those screws, and then I lined the belt through the hole in the front of the track and made sure that I joined it in the back, in the part away from the needle bed. And now both of the gears on the right and the left wheel are able to be lined up with their spikes lining up with the holes in the belt. Next, I put in the next module, and I reassembled that and popped in all of those screws. And I lined up the 2 screws here so that it wouldn't jiggle around. And then I went ahead and made sure that everything would rotate manually. I put that little black metal thing on top of the gear wheel, and then I tackled the punch card. So the punch card was very, very dirty. As you can see, I took some of the black needles out, and I need to make sure that the pointy part was inside and the blunt part was outside of the needle selector unit. This is what's going to make your punch card work smoothly. I had to make sure that all of those black spikes were cleaned. They were gummed up and they just wouldn't move. So again, Goo-Gone, alcohol, and then a little bit of machine oil. Then line up your punch card and make sure that everything works nice and smoothly. Here we go with a couple of things, making sure that you loosen the screws here on the collar, but you don't ever take them out because they are perfectly lined up. So moving the card guide back and forth until it fits. Now, finally, the bed assembly. So here, I wanted to go ahead and make sure that everything was nice and clean. You can see I have my Q-tips on there for when I needed to find any spots of gunky grease to take it out. And I reassembled everything back to normal. And the very next thing you do after you get all the parts put back on and the plastic casing on top is we need to reinsert those needles. So let's go see how to insert needles. So here you go, and you put the hook down first, and then you slide it through the front hole like this. And then you go ahead and you push down the bumpy part or the butt of the needle, and you slide it all the way back into a non-working position. So you can do that. If you have old needles that came with yours and you're not buying new needles, go ahead, again, degrease it. And the next thing you want to do is put your sponge bar back in, metal side up, puffy side on the bottom, and you need to put it on top of your needles. You can see here I took a spatula and you can see where the sponge bar is and how it's depressed some of those needles. I just put my spatula to accentuate it. My spatula was not pressing down those needles. So now inserting that sponge bar, you need to put it metal side up, puffy side down, and it is very tight sometimes. So I just put a cap on the end and I tried to push it down as it slid, and I kept depressing the needles for each batch that it went through. I used the tip of a spatula to do that, but if yours came with the right part for it, you can use that. But I just pushed it through, pressed down the needles, and made sure that sponge bar was on top of those needles. That's what's really important, because that's going to help with the tension and making sure it has that bit of sproing. And you can see here from the side angle where the pliers are pointing that the depressed needles is where the sponge bar is already inserted, and the raised needles is where the sponge bar has not yet been inserted. And so when the sponge bar is on top of the needles, this is the way it needs to look. And so next, after that, what we went ahead and did is pull everything back together, and you could see that this is showing how the needles are all lined up after the sponge bar was in. So now here are some troubleshooting tips I thought you might be interested in. These are actually going to be from the user manual itself, showing the different combinations of knitters and ribbers that are good for your model that you happen to have if you don't have an 881 like was shown earlier. Also, these are some tips for cleaning the carriage, your needle selector unit, and a few of the other things that you can look at if this might help you. So feel free to screenshot any of these and take a look, or go ahead and look for the manual yourself and go ahead and download it. But what works with the machine, thanks to Knit It Now, is that these are all of the different elements that work with specifically a KH881. I would encourage you to go to their website. Here's their website specifically for the KH881, and also you can Google the term machine knitting. You're going to find a lot of great resources. I'm with xpfe.fun. We have books by Wynter Sommers. Thank you so much.